Hey guys, Drifter here. Today I want to talk about the Terrifier franchise. This once obscure series of independent horror movies is now one of the biggest and most bankable brands in the genre, such that I was able to pick this up at Spirit Halloween just for the purposes of the video. Terrifier 3 got its own popcorn bucket, Call of Duty Warzone skin, and Fortnite skin. I have no idea why Epic Games removed the Peacemaker dance from the game for being offensive, but left in a skin about a character that tortures Santa Claus with liquid nitrogen and then graphically murders over a dozen children on Christmas Eve. There's a lot to discuss here today since Terrifier has ultimately hit the cultural zeitgeist, so we're going to be reviewing Terrifier 1, Terrifier 2, and then Terrifier 3. We will be answering questions like who or what is Art the Clown? What are these movies about? Are they even about anything at all? Why do so many people enjoy them? Why do I enjoy them? We'll also be discussing their surprisingly large impact on film history, at least when it comes to independent filmmaking and box office metrics, and I've got a bunch of fun graphs to show off that will help quantify the Terrifier franchise. Before we get going, I wanted to offer a quick shout out to Nick Spheres and her review of the series because that's what helped me understand it better. It'll be nearly impossible for me to offer my opinion without borrowing from some of hers, so I linked her original video down there in the description if you want to check it out. And I think the best place to start with all of this is with 2016's Terrifier. But before we do, this will also probably be my last media review here on this channel for some time. I'm moving all future media reviews to a new channel, which is going to be linked down there below in the description as well. So without any further ado, let's talk about Terrifier 2016. Back in 2015, pre-production times, an independent horror director named Damien Leone started an Indiegogo campaign to raise money to fund a feature-length horror film based on his previous works of The Ninth Circle from 2008, a short film called Terrifier from 2011, and the 2013 anthology film All Hallows Eve. None of these were what you would call particularly big hits in the horror community. Between the Indiegogo campaign and the funding from his friend Phil Falcone, Leone managed to raise about $35,000 to create a feature-length film. And by feature-length, I mean it's an 85-minute runtime, which technically makes it a movie. There's nothing abnormal about that for independent cinema, but it's definitely an anomaly compared to the very long, over 2-hour runtimes of the Terrifier sequels. So Damien Leone basically wrote an incredibly simple script that was designed as a vehicle to showcase all of his gore special effects work and the character of Art the Clown. Art the Clown was recast from the short films to be a new actor, which is David Howard Thornton, who in my opinion is one of the most underrated physical performers of all time. Thornton has an elementary education degree, as in a person who's supposed to be teaching children, but also an interest in clowning, miming, and voice acting. He's also extremely tall and skinny, and he has an elongated face that is perfect for prosthetics. They wanted somebody that could swap back and forth between being genuinely funny and also menacing to look at. So somewhere between the director and the actor, it was decided that Art the Clown would be silent, violent, and would only be in black and white to set it apart from other clowns like Pennywise or the killer clowns from outer space, which are bright, colorful, and typically loud. The Terrifier films aren't known for having amazing acting, but David Howard Thornton as the Terrifier is giving it every last ounce of his soul to bring Art the Clown to life. The first Terrifier film is exactly what you would expect from an extremely low-budget slasher. We've got one location, a very small cast, a paper-thin plot, an inexpensive camera, cheap microphones, and no budget for even a single penny worth of CGI. Every single thing that you see in the movie was done with extremely low-cost practical effects that the director rigged up himself. As a matter of fact, the movie was supposed to showcase those effects. So the original Terrifier opens up with a genuinely disturbing scene of Art the Clown stalking and intimidating two women that are just trying to get some pizza. Stalking women is a big theme in the Terrifier movies, and it gets off to a strong start here with Art just glaring at them and making creepy gestures from across the table in a pizzeria. Watching this initial interaction made me feel genuinely uncomfortable. Then the original Terrifier film tries to go in a comedic direction where Art the Clown writes his name on the wall of a bathroom in feces after he murders the pizza shop owner in a very graphic way. I'm not sure why that was supposed to be funny. I personally found it scary, like when you're listening to a psychopath tell a joke and they clearly don't know how jokes work. I don't know what was wrong with the director here, but it came off really tone deaf and deeply concerning, but it does set up a recurring theme of the franchise, which is bodily fluids everywhere. The rest of the entire plot of the original Terrifier is that two party girls, Tara and Dawn, get trapped in an abandoned and dilapidated apartment complex which just so happens to be the home of Art the Clown. While trying to escape, they'll run into a pest exterminator, a homeless woman, and a relative of one of the characters. The most notable kill in this film is where one of the main girls gets sawed in half down the middle, fully bisected. Art the Clown uses a hacksaw to slowly saw down from groin to head. It's incredibly difficult to watch, but the special effect work is way above the budget of this film. I was at this point genuinely not enjoying the film. I was not having a good time. This really wasn't funny. It wasn't working for me. It just kind of felt grim and mean-spirited right up until about the part where Art the Clown pulls out a Glock. And I just busted out laughing. I couldn't take it. So I actually had to pause the movie and take a break because this was so ridiculously funny to me, because slashers typically use like melee weapons. It's part of the genre, right? We've got some subversion of expectations going on. But yeah, about 2/3 of the way into the movie, one of the lead actresses is beating up Art the Clown with his own weapons. And you think, okay, this is heading to the finale where the final girl takes down the villain and it's going to be the end of the movie. But no, he just straight up pulls out a gun and just shoots her. And it is over. And I wish I could tell you how hard this scene made me laugh, because it just came out of nowhere. This was the one scene that made me not want to give up on the franchise. And as a small spoiler, you can skip the next few seconds if you don't like it. At the end of the movie, Art the Clown fully dies and is dead, and then is seemingly resurrected in a morgue via magic or demonic powers or something. And I'm only mentioning that because it sets up the plot points of the second and third films. The first Terrifier film would go on to make a little over $400,000 at the box office, which is about 10 times its budget. It got pretty good reviews for the type of film that it is, and even won 3 Fangoria Chainsaw Awards. Most importantly, this film was a proof of concept that planted a seed. It allowed the director to show that he has the skills to make something that an underserved audience can resonate with. Most importantly, the Terrifier pretty rapidly started building a reputation as an underground hit, even in the horror community, which is filled with underground hits. Lots of people watched this online after it was released based on word of mouth. And one important thing to mention before moving on to Terrifier 2 is that throughout this film, Art the Clown never speaks, and he certainly doesn't mention his own name. He's only called Art because he writes the word Art on the wall over each kill if possible. I genuinely think that the clown's name is not Art, and this is some sort of meta commentary or meta joke about what qualifies as being art, or is my trashy movie art, or some kind of clever little joke on that. But we'll circle back around as we talk about this happening at the end of Terrifier 2, which we're about to dive right into. Terrifier 2 was released almost 5 years later in 2022, and oh my god, what a movie. I think this one is going down in horror history, if not film history, for so many reasons, the least of which being the amount of people that threw up or passed out while watching Terrifier 2 in theaters. Like, seriously, a lot of people got very ill after watching this movie and had to be escorted out of the theater either on their own recognizance or in an ambulance in some capacity. This only made audiences love Terrifier 2 even more, and served as the perfect piece of free marketing for a movie that was supposed to be a resurrection of the 80s gory slasher films. I saw this marketing too and said to myself, I like gory films, I like violent stuff, I'm a big boy, I can take it. Well, when Terrifier 2 first came out to digital, it was on Amazon Prime, I decided to load it up and kind of click to a random part in the movie just to see how violent it could get. I just wanted to give myself a little preview of what I was in for. Ladies and gentlemen, I clicked right into the middle of the bleach and salt scene from Terrifier 2. I really started at the peak of the roller coaster here. This is the most infamous scene in the movie, and it's where Art the Clown sneaks into a character's house, slashes her eye out, scalps her, peels the skin off her back, breaks one of her arms off of her body, splits the other arm down the middle, and then when you think this onslaught of body horror is over, Art the Clown comes back to sprinkle bleach and salt all over the character's open wounds, even taking time to rub it in like she's a pig or salted meat, the whole time she's screaming in absolute anguish. And I gotta tell you, this particular kill actually made me feel dizzy and nauseous. For the first time in my entire life, I had to turn a horror movie off and take a break from it. It was so gnarly, so brutal, and so crazy. I couldn't believe that it made it into a film that got released anywhere. This was actually my first experience with any Terrifier film, and it immediately made me not watch them for another year. It took a lot of convincing from some friends to go back and give this series a try because what I had just seen was an abomination unto God. You can see from these graphs that Terrifier 2 is where this series truly peaks in terms of gore and violence against women. And I picked the peak of the peak, the gnarliest kill in the movie, but many years later I would go back and rewatch this movie, and I'm glad I did because it turned out to be one of the most refreshing horror movies that I've seen in the last decade. So the plot of Terrifier 2 is, in short, that Art the Clown is resurrected from the dead by a literal demon. According to the lore, Art the Clown was very much so a normal human in the first movie, just incredibly sadistic. This particular demon, however, can only possess or empower the most awful and corrupted of human souls, so she chose Art the Clown, who was already a violent sadist. So he comes back with a variety of quasi-supernatural abilities. He mostly just seems to be able to regenerate and now has low-level superhuman strength, but he also has a job to do now and isn't acting independently. The demon that Art now works for wants to murder a particular child in town in a particular way. The Terrifier, Art the Clown, is now forced to stalk and hunt down this character so that they can be sacrificed inside the Terrifier ride at the carnival. The ride is hinted to be a hell portal of some kind, so a large part of this movie revolves around the clown stalking Senna Shaw and her family, trying to get her into just the right place for this sacrifice. I want to put a heavy emphasis on the stalking part of this plot. A lot of people say this movie is too long, and I will admit that the stalking adds a lot of length to the film, but I'd also say it makes it a lot more genuinely scary instead of just splatter gore grossness. Art the Clown is an expert level stalker, and he's great at looking menacing in almost every scene that he's in, even if he's just in the background. Over the course of this 2.5-hour movie, you really start to empathize with the main character because you get front row seats to stalking so bad that she begins to doubt herself. Like, Art the Clown is also an expert level gaslighter in this, apparently. There are some grade A menacing and disturbing psychological horror moments in this film that should disturb anybody. The main character, Sienna Shaw, is played by newcomer Lauren Lavera, and we're not giving many compliments for acting in this review, but once again, I have to say that Lauren Lavera is truly giving it her all in this movie. She's above average at acting in general, but truly exceptional in the final fight scene in this movie. To skip ahead a little bit, the final fight scene between her and Art the Clown is about 30 minutes long, featuring this character in an Angel Halloween costume duking it out with melee weapons against one of the most sadistic killers ever seen on screen. It's brutal. It's nasty. There are so many stunt falls, so many pushes, so many big parts of physical acting that you have to do. It almost feels like the Avengers Endgame ending, but for a horror movie. Not many people are willing to work that hard and do that many of their own stunts, and I can't imagine it was anything less than a grueling single day or several days of shooting to get this done properly. So it's sort of a very deliberate final girl moment, but way over the top. Over the nearly 2.5 hours that it takes to develop to this finale, Art the Clown stalks down and murders most of this teenager's friends, family, no shortage of randos, and targets that are anywhere even remotely near her. Interspersed between these violent murders is a lore-building subplot about Sienna being a literal angel and possibly the only person that can kill the clown, possesses the only weapon known to hurt the clown in a meaningful way, and her father was somehow involved in this. Oh, there's also a ton of dream sequences that are mostly of the demon attempting to corrupt or influence Sienna Shaw. I suspect the dream sequences were filmed later because they seem to exist solely for the purpose of adding some additional murder to the film. The most notable dream sequence happens pretty early in the movie where the main character is transported to the Clown Cafe, in which Art the Clown forces children to eat bowls of guts, cereal filled with razor blades, and then pulls out a Tommy gun and mows down about 30 people, including lots of teenagers and teenagers that are playing younger children. I almost want to say this is a deliberate moment to talk about gun violence in America, but the movie treats it purely as a joke and then just sort of moves on as if nothing happened. It's sort of the running theme with this movie and franchise that if you often think that the movie is about to have something to say, It just deliberately doesn't. It just sort of teases you and then cuts off and saying, well, the violence itself is all that we want to say. It sort of leaves you hanging and wondering if the meaning was in the act of the violence itself. And I really think that's the meta joke of this franchise. Art the Clown never says his own name. He just writes the word art in blood and guts over each victim. It's not until the third movie does the demon even refer to him as such. The clown seems to view the murder process as artistic in and of itself. Like when he's completely alone, he's still putting on a show for somebody to watch. So I do think the point that the director is trying to make here is some kind of joke about what is and is not art. Does art have to be good? Does art have to be enjoyable? Can bad art still have value? What about deliberately offensive or gross art? Does the Terrifier franchise, with a paper-thin plot and limited other qualities, qualify as art just because people enjoy it? I genuinely think that the only level of depth in this movie franchise is the director subliminally asking the audience a question of, does my trashy movie count as art just because some people enjoy it? Well, why did I enjoy it, you might ask? Why are we talking about it here? Why did I previously describe this as a breath of fresh air in modern cinema? Well, that's because it's an absolute banger of a horror film, and it 100% succeeds in its goal of making people feel uncomfortable in new ways. It managed to do that with a budget of nothing. Terrifier 2 had a budget of about $250,000, and that's still absolute peanuts for a feature-length movie, and less than some people pay for fancy cars. With that amount of money, they made a full 2.5-hour horror movie that never gets boring and has very impressive production value for the budget. Everybody that I've showed this to tells me they assume it's a $3 or $4 million movie. Like, it looks like a real movie. There's no sound problems, no lighting problems, no bad acting problems. The special effects work is literally god tier, and they managed to make some of the most realistic body horror that I've ever seen on film for less than the catering budget of Demi Moore's The Substance, which is also a fantastic movie, but literally the snacks on set probably cost 10 times more than this entire film. You want to watch a horror movie that delivers the goods? Well, Terrifier 2 200% delivers the goods that you signed up for in a slasher film, while still managing to add in stuff that you didn't know was coming, like stalking, body horror not related to gore, and a few funny moments that feel jarringly out of place in this film. Apparently, the word of mouth from the first film got around, so the cult fan base grew, and Terrifier 2 ended up making just under $16 million at the box office, with a very limited theatrical release, as in it came out in just under 900 theaters. Damien Leone succeeded in making a truly independent horror film that was also a genuine box office success. Beyond that, I also think Terrifier 2 is partially responsible for the renewed interest in slasher horror movies, which have been on the decline since the late 80s. The slasher genre was one of my favorites growing up. I loved me some Nightmare on Elm Street, some Friday the 13th, Halloween movies. You know, you had your big three, your Freddy, Jason, Michael. You could maybe even throw Pinhead in there if you wanted to. But in the 90s, and especially after Scream, this genre sort of lost its way. It started getting a little bit too complicated, a lot less campy, and more censored in all of the wrong ways, which ultimately made slasher films less fun. So from the 90s to the 2010s, it was pretty much on its way out as a genre, but the Terrifier series perfectly encapsulates what makes slasher films fun. The Terrifier films are very self-aware and know what they are, which is just gratuitous violence for the sake of violence. The Terrifier franchise understands that its bloodthirsty audience is there for the meat and not for any moral lessons. They don't need deep character backstories, they don't need CGI monsters, they most certainly don't want the camera to cut away when somebody's going to get hit in the face with a chainsaw. What Terrifier 2 gives beyond the violence is a really refined taste of dark humor, kind of like Super Jail, if you're familiar. It's very self-aware, very campy, it has really great comedic timing, and it's the perfect slasher movie that pays homage to the greats of the 80s, but manages to do something new by pushing the envelope, I would say just a bit further, but the reality is a lot further. It really was a joy to see such a simple and self-aware movie do so well at the box office. Terrifier 2, however, is not without flaws. Beyond being a little bit low budget and definitely longer than a horror movie should be, it has major issues with violence against women. The vast majority of the recipients of extreme, gratuitous, and just upsetting levels of violence are women. Most of the male characters die quickly or simply, but the women get tortured for scenes that go on for so long you're going to think that you're actually watching a snuff film here. As you can see from the graphs, Terrifier 2 is where both the gore and the violence against women peak in this franchise. Odds are that if you're a fan of horror movies and you're watching this video, you're probably familiar with this very specific subgenre of horror called The Director Secretly Hates Women. These films typically have a lot of women getting murdered brutally, slowly, painfully, or sometimes just being naked and tortured for segments that go on for so long it can't not be a fetish. The last one that had this problem that we talked about on this channel was Hardware. So when Terrifier 2 came out, a lot of people very rightfully criticized this film as being in the genre of I hate women and its secret torture porn. I also 100% got that vibe from this movie, despite it having a very strong female lead. The director was not unaware of this criticism and seems to have taken it to heart because apparently he's a single guy that lives at home with his mom, or at least did at the time of filming this. So he decided to make some pretty radical changes to the genderfied violence in Terrifier 3. Terrifier 2 was a big enough hit where Damien Leone and Phil Falcone managed to get some proper funding, as in millions of dollars, to make Terrifier 3. The only downside is they only had 2 years to do it, so in a bit of a rush job, Terrifier 3 came out in 2024. Terrifier 3 is probably the most widely viewed and popular film in the franchise. This is the movie that took Art the Clown from cult status to fully mainstream. It also earned just under $100 million at the box office compared to a meager $2.5 million budget, so in terms of profitability and almost in terms of real numbers, it outperformed Joker 2, which was the other clown movie that came out at a very similar time. I also found the marketing strategy to be hilarious, devious, and more than a little bit unethical. So the production company behind these films saw that people were having to get escorted out via ambulance from Terrifier 2 screenings, and that this was an extremely effective piece of marketing. So they sought to recreate this by guaranteeing strong reactions to screenings of the third film. They decided to do blind screenings for an as of yet unrated holiday film, which many people thought was going to be Red One with Dwayne Johnson. A lot of people showed up expecting a PG-13 family holiday film and even brought their kids. Almost none of them were prepared for Terrifier 3, which gets very graphic very quickly in the movie, and it's no surprise at all that a lot of people got sick and walked out of the screening. Now, an immature part of me thinks that this is absolutely hilarious. That's probably the part of me that most enjoys the Terrifier franchise, but a realistic, mature drifter knows that this is a pretty cruel trick to play on unsuspecting families, and especially their children that don't need to be watching Terrifier 3. But all of that to say, yes, Terrifier 3 is a holiday film that fits into a long line of traditional Christmas horror movies. I also think this is definitely the funniest Terrifier film and the one that's going to appeal the most to a wider audience. It's only barely less violent than Terrifier 2 and is probably more gory on a technical level, but it has less mean-spiritedness to it. This is the first time that the franchise was truly a splatter comedy instead of just splatter. Damien Leone must have heard the online criticisms from the other films because he significantly reduced the amount of genderfied violence in this one and gave men some of the worst kills just to prove a point, but I'm getting distracted. Let's do a quick plot summary and then jump into the details of Terrifier 3. So this film opens up from the perspective of a family on Christmas Eve. The family is visited by Art the Clown instead of by Santa Claus. The entire family, including 2 small children, are brutally murdered in a truly terrifying way, no pun intended. Then it cuts to a mental facility several years in the past, where the now possessed final girl from the first movie goes on a body horror murder rampage against the staff, resurrects Art the Clown again, and then her and now headless Art the Clown go into a spooky stasis for several years before being revived once again by the evil demon girl from the second movie, who has an absolutely nasty, disgusting bathtub kill scene. Art the Clown quickly and brutally murders 2 building inspectors while the demon masturbates with a shard of broken glass. In order to explain why this clown has a Santa Claus suit, there is an extended sequence where Art the Clown has a 1v1 with Santa Claus, which ends exactly the way you would expect, with Santa getting his face covered in liquid nitrogen. In the meantime, all of this violence is interspersed with clips of Sienna Shaw from the first movie being released from a mental health care facility. She's got bad PTSD, and I gotta say once again, her acting in portraying a person with severe PTSD is really good and punches above the pay grade of a film like this. She's heavily scarred, both physically and mentally, and for a lack of better words, damaged goods these days. A lot of the rest of the film involves Art the Clown slowly stalking her and gaslighting her into losing her mind again while picking off her friends one by one. In the middle of all this, there's an utterly amazing scene where Art the Clown plays a mall Santa. I don't want to spoil it for you, but the mall Santa Art the Clown scene was by far the funniest part of this movie, or really any Terrifier movie that I've seen. It also had a pretty wonderful, funny part where a true crime podcast girl is being stalked by Art the Clown, and he gets to listen to her describe him as the most prolific serial killer since Jack the Ripper. The actor does a fantastic job at miming being flattered and compliment and then offended, and he just seemed to really get a kick about her comments on his brutality. She also seems to have a kink for this kind of murder, so it's downright hilarious when the two actually get to meet face to face later in the film. This movie contains the now infamous shower chainsaw scene, which is probably the goriest thing that I've ever watched on film, yet somehow less disturbing than most of the kills in Terrifier 2. There's a lot of somewhat clunky lore building going on that makes it very clear that the clown is being empowered by an actual demon. The main character is the chosen one to take him, them, they, them down, I don't know. There's a magic sword that's the only way to do it, and the Terrifier Halloween ride is somehow a literal portal to hell. And there's a surprising amount of background lore about how Art the Clown doesn't like his new job as an unkillable monster. I guess he just doesn't really like having a demon for a boss and prefers to be an independent murderer. It all leads up to a pretty gross but somewhat underwhelming finale, which is the perfect part for me to talk about the flaws of this film. While Terrifier 3 is quite long for a horror film, it's somewhat shorter than Terrifier 2. Normally, I would say this is a good thing because the perfect length for a horror movie is 85 to 90 minutes, but there's something very obviously missing from the end of this film. A big part of the main character's arc seems to have taken place off camera, and 2 major main characters also die off camera. We only find out later when we see their corpses. It's really rare for a film like this to have characters die any other way than graphically and for the enjoyment of the audience. So given the fact that the director said this film was made in a tremendous rush and also edited in a time crunch, I'm going to assume that this additional character arc and these additional character kills were filmed, or at least planned to be filmed, but at some point they just had to put something out into theaters to go live. It's a little bit of a shame because I feel like that might have actually rounded out the movie to be a bit better, but I'm not too bummed about it because we still got over 2 hours of Terrifier here. In a way, it's both good and bad. Terrifier 3 is by far the most polished of all these films. Its visual fidelity, sound design, effect work, acting, music, and just about everything about it is better than its predecessor, and that would make sense because we added an extra 0 at the end of the budget, moving it up from $250,000 to $2.5 million. I think the only downside to this is that I, an internet troglodyte, somewhat enjoy less polished cinema. I'm often a little bit happier with a really good independent film that has some rough moments than a well-polished high-budget film. This movie doesn't have that problem nearly as bad as most, but it does have a little bit of an over-polishing problem. That might just be the filters they put on the camera. The good part is that it's a much more watchable movie for almost everyone on the planet, and it's a lot funnier, and somehow significantly less mean-spirited than the previous 2. I think that those things all combined contributed to its $100 million box office run. This near $100 million box office return is the perfect launchpad to talk about the Terrifier franchise's surprising impact on film history, or at least what I suspect will be considered game-changing and standard-setting in the near-term future. Firstly, it revived the slasher franchise in a way that I did not think was possible in this era of elevated horror. I love elevated horror, but there's nothing quite like a campy slasher because sometimes I don't want to think too hard. I don't want a moral lesson or an allegory. I just want some murder. Art the Clown has properly joined the pantheon of horror villains like Chucky, Freddy, Jason, and Ghostface from Scream. We literally haven't had a new horror icon like this in almost 30 years, and I'm glad to see Art bringing it back in a way that is so mainstream that there's an entire Terrifier section at Spirit Halloween every year. Secondly, all three of these movies performed exceptionally well at the box office on a budget of nothing and while being unrated. Up until recently, theaters didn't even release unrated films unless it was a rare circumstance where a foreign film like an anime hadn't been submitted for rating yet. Unrated films were usually lumped in with X-rated or adult-rated or things that you just shouldn't touch. Well, Cineverse worked out some kind of deal with the devil to get these movies in theaters fully unrated without any tinkering from the Motion Picture Association of America. That's a rare move and a bold one as well, but it paid off every single time and made crazy stupid money for both the theaters and the producers of this film. I mean, we even had Terrifier popcorn buckets last year. What they essentially did was completely break the production to distributor to rating system business model. Typically, a group of people would produce a film, then it would go to a different group to distribute, and that group would certainly get it run through the MPAA for rating, and then finally into theaters that approved. Well, in this case, the production and distribution company happens to be the same, and it seems like they didn't really bother rating the movie, and that didn't seem to matter because it made a truckload of money anyway. I've seen a lot of other independent films starting to try to copy this model, and even in the last year or two, I've seen movie theaters much more open to showing unrated or independent films. Terrifier 3, and to a lesser degree hits like Late Night with the Devil, have brought independent film back to theaters in a way that I haven't seen in my lifetime. I think this is a good thing. I'm all for breaking the current system and models of distribution and supporting independent film. And now finally, we circle back to our main question of what are these movies about, if anything? I think the answer is that they're almost deliberately about nothing. I think the director has something to say about who gets to decide what is and is not art. As long as people are enjoying this senseless brutality of the Terrifier film franchise, no matter how low brow it may be, who's to say that's not art? Does it not have merit just because people enjoy it? I think Art the Clown writing the word art on the wall is just a nod to the audience that he's putting on the performance just for them, and a reminder that you and the audience of this film are a sick person that enjoys this depravity. It's just a little reminder that as long as you're enjoying it, it still counts as art, no matter how depraved it may be. Well, that was a lot to talk about, but I just kind of wanted to talk about this film franchise because it really blew my mind last year. I wish I had watched these in time to record last year's Halloween movie reviews. I did a rewatch this year. It's a lot to take in one day. I know that a Terrifier 4 and possibly even 5 or 6 are on the way now, as the director seems to be backing out of ending the franchise, so I briefly wanted to put in one request in this video on the random off chance that Damien Leone actually watches this review, which is, please don't do a backstory for Art the Clown. He's been teasing additional backstory of how he went crazy or prepossession or just more about his day-to-day life, and I just think that's a terrible idea. I don't really care about the clown's backstory. I don't think anybody except for super diehard fans do either, and I also think one of the best things about Art's backstory is that it's blank. There might be little clues and nods and tips of the hat here and there, but nothing definitive. He seems to be evil just in and of himself, even without the demon. Art the Clown serves as an antagonist, as a shark, as a predator that's constantly stalking you throughout these films. I think that when you try to humanize a level of danger that is basically a force of nature, you inherently make it less scary. So I'm really hoping for no Art the Clown backstory in Terrifier 4. Guys, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. And check out the links down there below. You can check out Nick's Fears review and my second channel, which ideally will be just for media reviews. Drifter out.